Welcome back. I think this is pretty much where we left off in the last video. I'm just putting the casters on the bottom of the pedestal leg assemblies. What I did first was used my combination square and got it set up on here exactly where I wanted. Then I made marks where I wanted to drill the pilot holes, and I've got a 1/8 inch drill bit, and I've set the depth and just used a little piece of masking tape here to keep me from going too deep, although it wouldn't really hurt anything if I went a little too deep. Alright, I'm using a total lock or swivel lock, wheel lock combination. So when you lock this, it stops it from swiveling and from rolling, which is actually really nice for shop fixtures. You certainly don't want them moving, and by stopping the swiveling and the rotating function, it really helps stabilize the equipment. Now I'm just using a little driver here to get these in most of the way, and then what I'm going to do is get it into its absolute final position and tighten it down the rest of the way by hand. I'm using number 10 by 1¼ long screws. These are pan head Phillips screws. And now what I'll do is I'll just double check the position. Scoot that, there we go. And now I'll just hold this down and tighten these screws home. There we go. And as you can see, when it's locked, that won't move and the wheel won't turn. So that's pretty good. After getting the wheels installed, we were able to take the base assembly, flip it over, and place it on the floor. We then slid the torsion box top assembly onto the base just to get an idea of what the finished assembly is going to look like. With the top mocked up onto the base assembly, I was able to slide the whole Outfeed table over to the back of the SawStop saw. And as you can see, this overhanging section of table fits right over this angle bracket in the back of the saw. The top is nominally about a 1/2 inch below the surface of the table saw, and that's by design to give us room between the torsion box top assembly and the pedestal leg assembly to install our leveling system that will independently level the top and get it perfectly flush with the top of the saw. So we still have a few things to do. Obviously, installing this leveling system is one of the main things we need to do. We also need to cut and install the trim piece that we made previously to go over this edge and wrap around the bottom. Then, of course, we need to make the drawers and the drawer faces for that. But there's another thing that we want to do back here as well. This is what I've been calling the saw side of the table. And you'll remember we set this panel back on these 8-inch deep pedestals so that we would have space in here for shelves. I've decided to do this with shelf pin holes so the shelves will be adjustable. So I'm going to go ahead and drill those shelf pin holes and get that little piece out of the way. Okay, now to drill the shelf pin holes, I've moved the torsion box top assembly back just to give me a little bit light and space here. I've got a scrap that I was using to test dado cuts with, and I'm going to put that on top of the pedestal leg and just clamp that down. And what that's going to do is provide me a top registration so I don't really have to do any measurements. Now this Craig jig has this lip edge over here on it, so I can just push this to the top to register it, start drilling my holes. Then there's a pin that will go into the last hole to register it for the next step to go down. Now I'm going to start drilling with the third hole. I can't imagine with the top assembly being out over here that I'd want a shelf much shorter than that. So I'm going to start in the third hole. I'm going to drill that first hole here. And then I'm going to use the registration pin in that hole just to help me hold it. And now all I have to do is drill the rest of the holes and just keep on going down. All right, now I'm only going to drill down to the fourth hole here because that's the one that's going to be level with the bottom of this cabinet, and I don't want to go any lower than that with a shelf because we left this space open on the bottom on purpose for dust collection hoses, cords, and things like that. All right, now with this Craig jig, this edge that we use to register off this edge, this unsnaps and slides off. So now I can turn this around and use it flush against this face, against this board I clamped up here, and start drilling right there. And that hole will be lined up perfectly with this hole. I'm going to take my registration pin again, put that in just to help me hold this in place, and drill the rest of these holes. And there we go. Quick and easy. So I think this is going to be a pretty handy feature once this torsion box top is moved out. This will be kind of a concealed set of shelves that I can use for supplies. And when it's shoved up to the saw, it'll basically be out of sight. But then when I move the entire assembly out to use it as a glue-up table, I can have my supplies right there ready to go. All right, so if you remember all the way back to segment 2A, we drilled a locator hole through the top piece of the top and the bottom piece of the top assembly. And now what we're going to do is we're going to use that locator hole and drill a hole straight through. I'm using a 7/16 inch bit, and what I've got here is a couple of pieces of scrap glued together to form a 90-degree corner. And I've got them sitting and clamped into place so that I can make sure that I drill this hole as straight as possible. I'd love to be able to take this top over to the drill press, but that's kind of not too feasible. With our access holes drilled in the four corners, the 7/16 holes drilled all the way through the top assembly, now we can take the top assembly and locate it on the base. Now it's very important to get this on correctly. The distance from the edge prior to adding the trim, the distance from the edge to the pedestal leg is 1.25 inches on both sides, 1.25 inches up here obviously. The top assembly is flush with the face frame in the front, and there should be 5/8 of an inch overhang back here on the saw side, the back side of the table. So I've got that in position. I've clamped it down just in case I bump into the thing. I wouldn't want it to move. Now what we need to do is we need to use our access holes to mark the locations of those holes on the pedestal leg assemblies. And that's going to be pretty easy. We're going to use this same drill bit, the 7/16 drill bit that we used before. And what we're going to do is we're just going to stick the drill bit down through here by hand and give it a couple of spins, and it should make a little mark on the top of the pedestal leg assembly. And then we're ready for the next phase of the project. Okay, with the access holes drilled and the marks made on the pedestal legs, I've moved the top back to the side, and I have T-nuts. These are 3/8 16, meaning 3/8 diameter and 16 threads per inch. And I'm going to fit that up here in the hole, and I'm going to press it in a little bit. And then tap lightly. And seat that fully on the MDF. I can then thread in this foot. It has a little bit of nylon on the base. This outside diameter is 1.5 inches, and it's threaded all the way to the end, but importantly, it has a screw slot in the top. So as we thread this in, all the way in, then we'll be able to use this to adjust from the top a screwdriver through that access hole that we drilled earlier. Okay, there we go. I've got it all the way up now, and then simply by sticking a screwdriver through the top, be able to turn the shaft and adjust this foot, the depth of it. All right, the last step in taking care of the independent leveling system for the top assembly is to drill some partial holes here that will trap the foot of the leveling leg. And we want to trap that foot in there so that there's no chance of the top sliding. When we slide a large piece of work across the table saw and onto the outfeed table, we certainly wouldn't want the top of the outfeed table to slip. So we'll trap those leveling feet in a hole here drilled 1/2 inch deep. Now the feet are 1.5 inches diameter, so I have 1.5 inch diameter Forstner bit, and we're going to go 1/2 inch deep, which happens to be almost exactly the depth of the Forstner bit. So I'm just going to drill it until this top is essentially flush with the top. And these are the marks that we made earlier by slipping the 7/16 inch drill bit through the access hole and just twisting it by hand. You can see it made a good mark there. And there we go. That should be just about right. So here's our new leveling system installed. Let's take a look. As we turn this, we can raise or lower the top assembly. And let's see the net result of that up top. As you can see, there's a very slight gap here between the steel rule that is on top of the table saw extending out over the outfeed table. And in practice, that little bit of gap might be exactly what you want. But just to show you how the adjusting mechanism works, I've got a screwdriver through the access hole, and I'm going to decrease, and you can see the gap getting wider. And now I'm turning. That's 1/2 turn, that's 1/2 turn, and that's 1/4 turn, and we are just about perfect. So this is nice. This is really an adjustable system here. I think this is going to work out just fine. The good news is even though the outfeed table isn't finished yet, it's far enough along and close enough that I think I'll be able to use it for this cut rather than those roller stands that I've been using before. Now what I've done is I've set up, this is our board that we plowed out the center of with the dado stack, and I've set up as close as I can to dead center, and I'm going to rip this in half to form our trim pieces. It's time now to cut the mitered corners on the trim for around the torsion box top assembly. And I'll tell you right off, this is not my preferred method of cutting miters. Typically I would use my miter saw, which I trust and am very comfortable working with. The accuracy is quite good. However, I wanted to use the SawStop for every operation that I could on this project. And this gives us an opportunity to see how the miter gauge performs. Now, as just an overview, the miter gauge is nice and relatively firm in the miter slot. There's not a lot of slop or movement. The adjustment mechanism is, I would rank it okay. And I've done the best I could to set this up to get a 45. I've got a long enough board here that I'm going to take a cut and then we'll see how close it is to really being 45 degrees. I put a sacrificial fence on here really more just to help hold this. And I think I'm all set, so let's make a cut and see what it looks like. Actually, that doesn't look too bad. Okay, I've got the one cut miter lined up in the other end and the board temporarily clamped in place. So all I have to do now is take my combination square and line it up right here on the corner and make a mark. And that's going to be my cut mark at the table saw. Well, the miters are all cut for the trim pieces. They were all cut on the table saw. Not really my preferred way to do it, but it went okay. I think if I had taken the time to build a miter sled, I probably would have been much happier than using the miter gauge. But it worked out okay. Just had to do a little bit of tweaking after the cuts were made, but everything fits pretty good. Now what I've done is I've clamped in the two end pieces exactly in position, and I've got the long piece on the saw side in position. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue in this long piece first using the two side pieces to help me position it. Once that sets up for a little bit, then I'll glue the two end pieces in. So I've got everything laid out. I think I'm pretty much ready to go. So let's get started gluing. I've been milling some walnut boards here for the last little bit, just getting some pieces ready to use for the drawer fronts. As you can see, all of the trim is on now, and it looks pretty good. I think this will really protect the edges from those inevitable dings this table's bound to get around the workshop. You may also see that I decided to drill a set of shelf pin holes in the middle of this back panel. They of course match the holes that I drilled in the pedestal legs. I think this extra shelf pin in the middle will help keep these shelves from sagging. So in our next, and what will be the final video in this series, we're going to make the drawers. We're going to use a nifty little joint that will cut completely on the table saw. We're also going to cut the relief grooves in the top that will allow a miter gauge or crosscut sled to extend out onto the table. Oh, and I'm already experimenting with some finishes. I've got some samples upstairs drying right now. So come on back and we'll wrap up this outfeed table for the SawStop saw. I'm looking forward to seeing you.